good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. Whichever part of the world and whatever time zone you are in, thank you for joining us for the 2021 edition of the Black Consciousness Festival. This year, we are inviting you to shift. Join with amazing people across the world as we explore the many ways we, as people of African descent, grow, cultivate, produce, share, and rebirth ourselves. Through our ancestral knowledge, historical legacy, pride, power, and practice, let's celebrate the individual and collective ways we navigate through life. Together, we continue to walk in pride, power, and practice. Enjoy the session.
Hello and welcome. Welcome to this conversation where we're going to be talking about Anansi Lives, using storytelling to connect our children to their African heritage. And when I hear children, I'm thinking it really could be as well, using storytelling to connect adults. In this conversation, leading today is Jamie Filbert. Jamie is a choreographer, performance artist, martial artist, designer, boa woman, I would say, Kalinda, warrior woman. So I welcome you and I welcome Jamie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm well, thank you. Good to see you. Have fun.
Good. I am really pleased to be here. I want to thank Black Consciousness Festival for inviting me and having me be a part of this very beautiful experience and a necessary thing that I think that we need to be doing for our people. I first want to start off by giving thanks and praise to the ancestors, to my own mother and father, Dennis and Veronica Filbert, the ancestors of Kalinda, past, present, and future, the women, the men, the children, and all those who made this moment possible for me to sit here and for all of us to be here and communing with each other. And Bote Simba. So I want to start off by, of course, chanting and bringing some vibes into this space that resonates with the conversation. Anansi, they set in a trap to kill you. They set in a plan to kill you. All them woman walk and stop you. Anansi, they're making a plan to kill you. They set in a trap to kill you. All them woman walk and stop you. When we speak of storytelling, we are speaking to the limbs of memory, archives created, and stories that are stored and replicated within the imagination, language, and body. When we speak of storytelling, we are summoning and shaping consciousness and ways of being. Image isn't just what we see, but also what we hear. When we hear stories, it forms identities of personhood, social values, and spiritual and cultural architectures that live on through multiple generations. Stories often grow nations by placing translated ideas and knowledge into the cerebral membrane of our society, which oftentimes cannot be undone until a new story is told. The storyteller has a deep responsibility in how they plant the seeds of the story they choose to tell. To translate means to move from one place or condition to another. In so, our African diaspora stories are living cargo, just as alive as the griot and communities toting the load that the story is. They contain paralinguistics of the Kuya Mount, Strips, Akatai, Arol Bamsi, the sways and silences of our historical landscapes, and the eyes of our futures. Our ways of telling stories inform us on how we arrive, how we return, and what our African diaspora futures hold. Every time our children engage us, they are taking in our stories. What stories will we continue to tell in order to nourish the crick-crack of their existence? I'm Jamie Filbert. Welcome to the Black Consciousness Festival, Anansi Lives. Using our African storytelling to teach our African heritage to our children. I'd like to welcome Omobola and Indhira to the stage. Omobola, please help me with your name because I don't want to say it wrong. I know I still say it wrong. I have to do better.
Omobola.
Omobola.
Yes.
Omobola.
Yes.
I gotta do my shoulders because I forget. I got it that time?
Omobola. Yes.
Beautiful. How are you doing this evening, ladies? Good to see you all. Good to have you all here. So we can go one by one so you can actually tell me how you're doing and if you want to offer any thanks into the space before we begin actually having the conversation. So, Omobola, would you like to go first?
Well, I'm very excited to be here. I thank everybody at Black Consciousness Festival for finding me and introducing me to this wonderful platform. Like it wasn't something I had heard of before, and when Sean reached out to me, I was really excited to learn about it, and so I'm just grateful. I'm thankful to the group for inviting me, um, and I'm just generally thankful for the impact that the work that I'm doing is having on the kids and people around.
Thank you so much. Indira, welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks, Omobola, for this amazing conversation. I'm here in the Dominican Republic, and I'm very glad to share my experience and a little bit of my folklore with you guys in this festival.
Wonderful to have both of you. So, since we don't know each other, I'm not gonna pretend like we had time to like get to know each other. I want to know more about you and the work that you do around African storytelling and what it means to you to be able to have that large responsibility of educating our children and shaping their futures. So, Indira, if you want to start first, and then we'll pass to Omobola. I can't do it without dancing Omobola.
Well, I think that I I'm trying to get really involved with my African heritage, especially because here in the Dominican Republic we don't have that. We're not used to embrace our heritage and to get to know our origins. So basically, through my work, what I'm doing is to learning with my audience, basically learning about our origins, about our culture, and how to connect a little bit with that part of our heritage. So basically, that's what I mostly do with my work, with my online character named Negrita Come Come.
Beautiful. Omobola, please, if you would.
So for me, I kind of stumbled upon this whole journey a little bit, and I actually started by just writing a children's book that wasn't necessarily um, about African culture, but it had African culture woven into the book. And, through that process of talking about my book with kids, I just realized the need for more knowledge and education about Africa. Like I grew up in Nigeria, and so I had a lot of connection, but also not a lot at the same time because even in Nigeria, on in the African continent, a lot of times we are not really taught our own history. We're not taught about the history of the countries around us. Like we may know a little bit about your tribe in your group, but you may not know about the neighboring country. We may learn more about European countries than we learn about the history of our own. And so as I started to uncover so many interesting things, just even with storytelling, and as when I do my classes for the kids with storytelling, I always like to give them some
educate them on some background information before I tell them the story. So sometimes I'll just tell them, this is where the story is from. Let's talk about Ethiopia for a moment, or let's talk about Kenya for a moment. What are the things that we know about Kenya? And even just going through that and discovering all these things about all these countries that I didn't know. And I'm like, and I grew up in Nigeria, like those are things that we don't know. So it's definitely very important, even for me as I'm learning about it. And also it's very empowering for kids, especially kids who are not connected, who are not, who didn't, who are not connected to their culture. It's really important for them to kind of understand that there's more to the history than that you see, because we don't see a lot of it. It's mostly like poverty and war and things like that. But there's so much more to our culture. Oh,
Jamie, your microphone.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay, nice. What do you feel is what a call and response, and what is the ritual inside of the work that you do? Call and response is a huge part of our storytelling, how it is that we learn in our cultures. In the Caribbean, click clack is something that is huge. The click is the call, and the crack is the response. That has a long history inside of it, so we don't have to get deep into that right now. But I'm wondering, inside of the work, what is the importance of the call and response, and how do you delegate that ritual?
Should I? Okay, go ahead.
Anyone else?
You go
Okay, so
first.
for me, I do most of my storytelling virtually. So call and response, and I hope I'm thinking about call and response the same way that you're thinking about it. But
You don't have to.
okay, so call and response, like somebody says something and somebody responds. And so like whenever I start my stories, I always start with a call and response. Every story. So in Nigeria, it's like story, and then you say story. Then I say once upon a time, and you say time. And that's just how, and actually it goes a little deeper than that. Sometimes it's like tomorrow comes and tomorrow goes. Like there's even a deeper call and response, but that is the shorter version, which in Nigeria is anytime you're telling stories to kids, that's how you start your story. So I do that with my kids all the time. Anytime I tell them a story and I start, they're like, but you didn't start with story. So I do that. And then as I tell my stories, I it's part of the storytelling to have people interact in the story with me. So if I'm like, she said, go faster. And then I tell the people, go faster. So like, we're always going back and forth. So that is really very important, in the storytelling for me, because that's how I grew up. Whenever I listened to stories, it was a lot of that, interactive. It's not like just you're not just sitting down and and listening. So that is something that I always start my stories with.
Yeah, I think that inside of the African diaspora, that's how we communicate, right? There isn't this thing of a fourth wall like there's in the Western theater. We are always, the chorus is a part of the voice, and the voice is a part of the chorus, right? One is all, and all is one. I'm interested to learn the Nigerian call and response, because in the Caribbean, it's crick crack, and different spaces do it different ways. So in Haiti, they would do crick, and then the audience would respond crack, and then the story would commence from there. In Trinidad, we used to do it one particular way, and I think we've moved away from doing it that way. So now the storyteller would go click crack, and then the children will respond monkey break it back on a piece of camera. So it's switched in different ways. So it's interesting here. So yours is story, and what would I respond?
Story.
Story. So do it now. Do it. Let me do it. I like to learn in interaction.
Story.
Story. And then
Then
what do
I
you
would
say?
say once upon a time, and then you would say time.
Time. Okay, already. I got it.
Okay, here we
Go.
go. Story.
Story.
Once upon a time.
Time.
Yes. The only difference is when you say the story, you kind of drag it out like story.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I think even those kind of those moments of play inside of the call and response and what that does to a child's mind, how they then get into their own beingness, how they learn to speak, how they learn to express themselves, is important. Yeah, we are not a people that are necessarily shy. If we see something that we love in an audience, we clap, we scream, right? We're not the people going, oh, this was so lovely and bravo. So them learning that from that age, what that means for their forms of expression, for their self-esteem and for their confidence. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Indira, same question, and definitely doesn't have to be my idea of what call and response is. I want to learn something new, and I'm sure our audience members would love to as well.
Yes. Well, listening to you guys, I was thinking that here in the Dominican Republic, we don't have something like that. Like we don't have a call and response when you start a story. We do say once upon a time, and then the story goes. Like we don't have that interaction with the people that are listening. So that it's for me, it's very interesting to listen that, for example, in Nigeria and Trinidad and Tobago, you have those things. But basically, what I try to do with my storytelling is to connect with people through stories that they can identify with, telling things that they're familiarized with. So that is very important for me. I don't like to speak or to write about things that I know that people won't connect. Um, so for me, it's very important to talk about things that we are familiarized with things that surround us, um, with words that are common to us. So that is something very important. But I would love if we have a call and I don't remember the other part, but I would like to have that.
The call, but I think that this is what the conversation is for, right? Because we're connected across the diaspora, it's important for us to learn the different ways and different forms and the similarities of how we do things and how we can make futures, not just for the children, but for ourselves, right?
Yes.
So that's the beauty of us being able to shape and connect. So right now, Indira, I feel like we need to do it one more time, and this way Indira could participate inside of it this time, and this way it's full. Because when we do call and response, when a call goes out, if no one responds, the story can't be told, right? And that's the same thing about, if you put your book out into the world and you're trying to share this information, if no one responds, if no one reads it, then the story gets lost, all right? So we're learning, we're growing, we're going. Madam Caller, it's on you.
All right, here we go. Story.
Story.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Once
and just
upon a
give me one
time.
more. So story we respond, and then we respond time.
Time. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Once upon a
One
time.
more time. Yeah. Time.
Oh, I'm lost.
Yeah. It's okay. That's what it's for. And I want you to be able to experience it because once upon a time, when you start a story with once upon a time, there's still a response that's happening, right? Even if it's not verbalized. The paralinguistic is in there. The children are going to raise their eyebrows, they're going to open their eyes, the sigh will come out. So the response is still there. And I think what's important for us to understand is even when we're working with children, even in their silences, they're grasping and absorbing something. So, which is why it's such a heavy responsibility to be the person that's giving the information, and how we give it. So with Indira, I'm not giving up on this. We're gonna do this one more time. We're moving on to the next thing. Yeah. So story after she says the first thing, and then time. Yeah, and the whole audience should have it by now.
Okay. Hopefully everybody has it. Here we go. Story.
So,
Sorry.
Once upon a time.
Time.
time. Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me in that moment. I feel like it's important for us as educators, because when you're a storyteller, you're an educator, is that we're always in the process of also learning and taking that time to learn, right? We're inside of this very formal conversation, but we are people of the African diaspora. And if we're saying that there's no fourth wall, then there's really no fourth wall, right? And that moment can happen. What there's a quick crack inside of our culture here in Trinidad and Tobago. I was doing some research on it, and the crack is actually in different European languages, meaning loud conversation. So it's speaking to a particular type of gossip, a particular type of thing. I believe that the way we told stories during 1700s, 1800s, the moment when we had the transatlantic hostage situation where our ancestors were taken from their place, which was home, and brought over to all these other places where they had to make a new home. That crack was also possibly the crack of the whip. And those stories was their responses. What do you feel inside of telling these stories? How do you give those pieces of information and not always from a place of suffering to children? How do you tell the story where, and do you even do that? Do you try to shield them from that?
Personally, when I talk about my stories, when I tell the children, I do try to, right now at this age, I do try to not focus on the struggle and the negative, because I feel like it's important, and I heard somebody saying this on Instagram or social somewhere, that I think it's important for children to develop a strong a strong sense of self first, like have that pride, rather than the first thing you hear about your culture being all these, negative things. And especially if you're not already connected to it, I feel like I want to, for it to be more uplifting and empowering. Is not to say that they're not going to learn those things, but when I focus on my storytelling, I'm just like, hey, this is our culture, it's beautiful, these are all the things, like I said before, when I go and when I do my storytelling, I always like to share information about something about the culture before I tell the story. And even when I look up things about other countries, the things that you see first are, you can tell that no African wrote this, right? Like if I look at, Kenya or whoever, it might be the first thing you see might be, this is the fourth poorest country in the world. 80% of them have disease. One person, well, there's one doctor for every 200,000 people. Those are statistics that you find when you're looking at these countries sometimes. And I'm like, wow, like that's that's odd that that's the first thing you learn about a country. And that's what so many people around the world are learning about this a country, when they're like, oh, let me go research Zimbabwe or
Right.
like all those things. So I try to focus for now, because the kids I teach are young. I try to focus for now on like empowering and uplifting stuff. And even when I talk about history, because I do stories about not just folk tales. I do stories about actual real life events, like battles that queens and kings have been through. And I always, even if the queen lost the war, like it's always like I always spin it like, okay, well, she lost the war battle, but it inspired all these people to do all these things. So I think it's really
Right.
important to have that, pride in kids, especially at the younger ages.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that there's a part of it where we oftentimes start stories from that experience, from that crossing of the water, as opposed to the histories that existed before that. So European children or, Caucasian children get to hear stories about Cinderella and all these things, and we don't get to hear those things, right? And I think that's the license that you get as a storyteller, that you can say, okay, this actually happened, but to be able to hear that there's a queen that possibly looked like me when I'm 5 years old, that I could be a queen one day, that I am a princess now, and it's not the princess that Disney portrays. Yeah, I think that's super important. And the same question, and then I have something I want to kind of play devil's advocate inside of it, because I feel like there's the joyful part of it, and I feel like there are stories should have a variety of emotions, just like Anansi presents, right? So, in there, same question about
Yeah, I think
crossing the
Jamie.
diaspora.
Yeah, I think that it's very important that we teach our younger generations that our African heritage comes with much more than the things that we are taught in school. Because, and I'm speaking with my own experience here in the Dominican Republic, we only associate Africans with slavery and with suffer poverty and all of those things. And those things continue until now. Like until now, if you ask someone about Africa, that's the idea that we generally have. And I think that it comes mostly with the things that we are taught during our childhoods. And also, I think that it's a popular idea that a general knowledge, I think that's the word, that everything that comes from Africa is either negative or poor. So I think that it's very important that using storytelling, we change that. Um, but I also think that and this goes with what you were mentioning, Jamie, I also think that we need to have a balance with the things that we say, because obviously we cannot hide that we had a past, that Africa had a past with, I will say, with a lot of negative issues that came because of a lot of other factors. So I think that it's also important to tell those things, but also, and it would be great if we also got to know the great folk stories that Africa has, or the great culture and tradition that Africa has. And that is even more important for the diaspora, because there's, at least in the Dominican Republic, there's so little that we know from that. Um, there are some people from African descent that are more connected with other origins. So I think that through storytelling, we can definitely change that situation.
And I think we know that we can do it with storytelling. I think what I'm trying to extract from the conversation is how, right? We write the stories. We know that stories can change a person's images. We know that it can make a person feel good. But yet we still have little black boys and little black girls feeling a way about themselves in school, right? Not seeing certain images on television. So how is it we get these stories out there in such a way that children have? We're doing amazing things at the moment. And I don't think it's COVID related. I think that we've been doing this as part of our narrative, as part of how we operate as a people. Um, but there are things happening like with social media, for instance. Instagram is doing this thing where they're blocking and shutting on people's pages at different points. People aren't getting a certain amount of visibility. So how is it that we, as the storytellers, as the educators, as the people of the African diaspora, get the stories out there to more children, to more schools, to more spaces? And that could be a hard question, but I want us to think about it together.
Oh, I don't. First of all, I want to say that I definitely 100% agree with you on the balance perspective. That is like very important. I tend to focus a lot more on the positives sometimes, just because I see a lot on the other side. So I kind of want to introduce a little bit of that balance. But to answer your question, it's a tough one. to get the stories out to more people and more kids. And it's also tough because I think that the things that they enjoy is not driven, but it's like the global things that they're enjoying. Sometimes I find some African things for my kids and I try to put it on for them, and they're so used to watching the Western stuff that they gear towards the Western stuff. Versus, even so, sometimes there's content out there, and sometimes we as parents, we know that they're out there and we present it to the kids, but a lot of times, because they've been fed so much of the other stuff, that becomes the norm for them. So
Right.
that it's really hard. I think, it's really trying to make some of it as mainstream as possible in a kind of, in a way, because I feel like our stories are really right now kind of viewed as for Africans in a way. Like, you have to be African to enjoy it or things like that. But I feel like no, our stories are just good stories, and you don't have to be African to like enjoy our stories. And I feel like if more people were to kind of to see that and accept that, even the children themselves will want to like gravitate that way. But I also think there's a responsibility on us as parents, as adults, to kind of seek it out, because it's going to be a long time before it's like you switch on your TV and you find, Queen so and so on your
Right.
Netflix, thing like that. So it's really up to us to seek it out as much as we can. And I try to, even like I said, my daughters sometimes gravitate towards the Western stuff, but any opportunity, whether it's a book I buy, whether it's, like I said, if I find something on YouTube or Netflix, I sit them down, we watch it, even like with images. Like sometimes I just see images of people and I'll make a point to say, oh my goodness, that person is so beautiful, so just even those like subliminal things, there is a little bit of a responsibility on us. And I think that if we try to also maybe work more with schools, I think people are becoming a little bit more open and receptive to this type of stuff. Maybe that's also something that we can do. So it's kind of like a collective. There's so many different angles
Right.
that you can attack it from. There's no one way. So we're going to have to do multiple approaches in order to make it, work.
I think one of the things that I'm wondering as you say that is, because you were saying that some of the responsibilities are on the parent, but I really feel like all of it is on the parent and the educators, right? The children are there for us to guide them. Um, our parents told us stories, right? So I think it goes back to the call and response thing. So if each person, this may be unrealistic, but I'm using my imagination as what you want children to do. But if every time I see a child that I know, right, even if I don't know, I'm in the safe, that I can have a conversation, a safe space for the child. And I tell the child a story and then they say, okay, I told you a story, now you tell me a story. So it becomes this exchange that's going on. So it's not just us giving them information, but them also having to ignite their own imagination inside of that. Um, I think sometimes we underestimate our children. Yes, the other shows are out there, and yes, it's completely, we're inundated by it, but I think that there's a space to go, you have this block of time to watch this, and now I need you to watch Carico. You know, um, you know what I mean? So a balance of that. So you're not blocking them from the other cultures, but like I said, it's an image changer. If I see a white person on the screen every day, and growing up, I saw a multiplicity of things that I didn't see myself on television. I heard a lot of different stories, and although I grew up in a Caribbean household, those stories weren't necessarily stories about me, right? So what that does to the child that is growing up, and like you said, our stories are not just for us; they're universal stories. So we also need to do that back and forth with the universe, right? Take us in the majority of the time is what I want to say. And also, disperse around. Um, yeah, Indira, you have any thoughts about that? And you have an interesting dynamic because you're in the Dominican Republic, right, which used to be connected to Haiti, and I know that there's a lot of back and forth politically that happens with both spaces. How does that play out in the Dominican Republic? And then when there's an exchange of Haitian people coming over to the Dominican Republic, how does that interact with the children in the space?
Well, um, first of all, I was thinking that we can also use the platforms that kids use to tell stories. Like we can use social media, we can use YouTube and things like that to connect with them because sometimes it's kind of hard to connect with them through other platforms. Mostly because they're used to get content in different platforms, let's say social media and things like that. So I think that it will be great if more projects directed to kids and to African culture and heritage could come out in social media or in YouTube. Like, I think that it will be an amazing thing, actually. Um, and in regards to what you were asking, Jamie, I think that you mentioned the how do we interact with Haitians and Dominicans with kids?
I was saying that, if there are children that come over into the space of Dominican Republic, right? And how does that work, that exchange now work with storytelling? Because we know what happens with the adults, right? We hear those stories in the media all the time. How does it work for the children in the space? Keeping in mind that the children in this space are still experiencing it because they're getting to see it. The stories that on either side of the small river that separates Haiti and Dominican Republic, on either side, the parents are giving them stories and filling them with certain stories. How is that? And I'm asking you because you're in the space, so I don't know if you're seeing it, if you feel it. So I'm curious to know how that's affecting the children in the space, how their
Um,
stories are.
yeah, well, I think that children are, they're not, I don't think that they're influenced in a positive way. Most of it because of what happens with the adults. I think that children get a lot of perspective from their parents or from other adults. So um, with the issues that happen in the adults, sadly, they also go to kids. But at the same time, I think that they're just kids. Like, I'm pretty sure that a Haitian and a Dominican kid can play and peacefully and in a non-hateful environment because they're kids. So I think that that's the most important thing to do, like to have more spaces in which kids from both countries can connect and can understand each other. Because sometimes we adults might have some issues and things like that. But I think that kids do it better when it comes to dealing with conflicts and all of that. I don't think that kids most of the time, I don't think that they see the negative portrays or the negative stories that we as adults um, repeat. But I think that kids, they just go and they just see a kid. Like, I can play with this kid. I can share a good moment with these other kids. So I think that that is the most important thing. There's also a lot of um, we don't know a lot about Haiti, at least from my perspective in the Dominican Republic, beyond the negative portrays that happen in the media and things like that. So I think that having more spaces in which we can connect and understand and learn from each other, it will be an amazing thing.
Well, I feel like that's the perfect story, right? What if there's a story that, especially if it's in that type of situation, right? Trinidad and Tobago doesn't have the same kind of situation that Haiti and Dominican Republic have, right? But I know that there is a feeling of angst when it comes to Trinidadians and Togonians and how Tobago people feel like they are treated. How do you, as a Dominican Republic citizen, then say, how do I tell stories of Haitian people that then influence those images for the children, right? And then vice versa, right? And if there's someone in Haiti that you can exchange stories with, so that then starts to root something different, hopefully, for the next generation. And again, I'm being hopeful, right? But if we're saying that our stories are powerful, I think it has that power to do that. It connects us. It literally connects us across space and time. I, when initially I was asked to do the conversation, I thought it was we were going to have a conversation around adults. I'm like, okay, yes, I'm going to be all heady about it. And I'm like, oh, we're talking about the babies. And I had to really sit and meditate on it because the children really are the key, right? They really are our future, not to sound cliche. And what we put inside of them now can shift things politically, culturally, what they grow, how they treat us when we get old, you know? So that's my little 2 cents in the pot, you know? Just, and what you said in Indira, that's what triggered it for me. What if you were to then start telling, because like you said, children don't have like a predisposition when it comes to hate. They're learning that from some story that a parent or person or family member has told them. When I first went to the States as a child, I was 9 years old at the Empire State Building. And I'm standing there with my mom, and there's a white girl there with her family. And, you know, I'm looking at her, she's looking at me. And then eventually she goes, the N word. I was going to say it because I'm like that. She says the N word. And I was like, I had never heard it before, but it did something to me. I think it's probably only place I would have heard it on TV, right? So I knew meant. And I remember going and just standing behind my mother. But that girl couldn't have been, she may have been my same age, she may have been younger than me. So it's no way that she taught herself that word. That's the story that her family members or somebody taught her, and then to give that to me. So when we don't operate in such a way that we understand that the stories are currency, right? We're gonna have all this pain is being paid forward. So I understand why Omobola would have stories that are just about joy, right? Because we've had so much pain inside of the space. Um, yeah, I think I'm thinking about the future of our children, and it's great to talk about what kind of stories we're making and what impact it has on children. But then for us to really think about proactive ways that we're actually moved beyond just writing the story. So that's my question. Beyond writing the story, beyond telling the story, how else do we get the story across to not just the children, to everyone? And not necessarily by media, not necessarily, yeah, how?
So your question is, how do we get the stories across to children without telling them the stories?
How do we do that without telling the stories? Because we're already doing that. We're telling stories. We're writing the books. What is another way that we can do that? There's a
Um,
children who may not be able to access a storyteller. They may not be able to access you or Indira. So what happens to that child?
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's lots of different ways, I guess, so you can, again, it kind of comes to the parents being able to seek things out, right? So there's the books, there's the storytellers, but then I think there's just incorporation of the culture into, like, for example, I signed my daughters up for a Yoruba language class, for example. They're not learning as much as I would like them to learn, but because they're just not as focused. But I feel like there's other ways, right? So it's just whether it's through the food you cook, right? So you might be cooking at home, you might be, explain to them this is our cultural food, or whatever it may be. Maybe it's the music you listen to at home. It could be something as simple as that. So it doesn't necessarily need to be like a full on training course, or you don't have to have everything, but even those little things, I believe, make a difference, whether it's the food, the music, the language, or just experiencing things. And hopefully, when they start to grow up, they will start to seek more of it out themselves, to learn about those things, and they start to get more interested. So yeah.
I think that's a great answer. And I'm asking the question, and it may seem like a silly question, but some people don't know that, right? Some people don't know that they can share a story through music. Some people don't know they can share a story through food. Yeah, so I think it's important for the audience to be able to hear that, and yeah, helping other parents and hopefully other teachers as well. How else do you tell stories? I'm aware of all the ways that I can tell a story. I'm a performer, so I know the ways that I can do it. But I wanna be able to hear from you all share the different ways so that that can get out to the audience. Indira, so
Well, I
siguiendo con
completely
buena
agree.
modestia.
Yeah, I agree with Omobola because I think that we can tell stories with our actions, and we can tell stories um, with our traditions. I remember that I once wrote about how Dominicans have presence of African origins in their food. So I think that that is something good. That is an example of how we can make children connect with their history and with their origins through something as simple as food, for example, and music as well. We also have in the Dominican Republic, for example, carnivals and things like that, in which a lot of people also wear costumes that are very related to African culture. So I think that that is also something, a way that we can tell stories without necessarily having to write them. Um, Basically, letting kids live um, and experience traditions and culture.
What are some of the stories that stuck with you from your childhood and that still influence you today?
Um, Stories related to anything, or
What are some of, and it can be about anything, but something that has stuck to you and grown you in a particular way. So it's still with you to this day. Um, there are sometimes phrases like I'll say one day kunkote, and it's something I heard as a child, right? So it's still with me. I'm 41 and I haven't stopped saying it for whatever reason. So that stuck with me. Anything. But that has influenced you in where you are right now in your life, something that you can pass on to other people, something that has contributed to your self confidence, to your self identity.
well, I'll start. In my case, I remember that it was a book that my dad took to the house, and the book was about um, religion in a part of the country that has a lot of African influences. So they were talking about voodoo and things like that, Dominican voodoo and all of those things. So that was something completely new for me. It was the first time that I listened to those stories, and they were talking about spirits and all of those things. So, and for me, it was so interesting because of the way that the writer wrote about it. He was um, basically telling stories that were connected with that part of our religion. So for me, that was something that, till this day, represents a lot to me because it was the first time that I was able to see something beyond the European vision or Spanish vision that we have in the Dominican Republic. It was the first time actually. So for me, that was like, oh, so there's more outside of what I've learned in school. There's more of our religion, for example, apart from what I've learned in Catholic school. So that was very important for to shape what I do now.
Thank you, Indira.
Omobola.
So for me, I wouldn't say a specific story stood out to me. I would say more. So, for example, when I was growing up, we had something called Tales by Moonlight, and it was, the idea is you gather around under the moonlight and people would tell stories. I mean, it was on TV, so it wasn't. It was like the old way of telling stories. But what I think carried with me today is more the way the storytelling happened as I grew up. So I went to an all girls boarding school, and there were times when we didn't have any electricity and we didn't know what to do with ourselves, right? And so we were just bored. And one way we used to entertain each other was to tell each other stories. And everybody would gather around in the middle of the night and listen to stories. And when I say that we would tell each other stories about movies we had watched. Like imagine somebody telling you about the Terminator movie, and they just like people were just like we were like 15 years old, but the way those stories were told, like you felt like you were in the movie. And I feel like that kind of storytelling kind of stuck with me, because they'd be like, and he came in and he shut the door and he, like, there's so much drama, and like all these girls would be sitting down like literally under the moonlight, and we're all telling each other story. Somebody's like, who has watched this movie? And that person will stand up and they would start with the story. Once upon a time, there was a Terminator, and it was just excitement around storytelling, like having that vivid understanding of a story, but with no books, no images,
Right.
like it's all in your mind, but you feel like you're there. That kind of stuck with me, and I think that's one of the reasons why I tell the stories the way I do, is just because I remember that, and I remember watching movies I'd never seen before. And then I watch it later, I'm like, oh, that's that movie that I heard about. Um, and then so I feel like I'm extra dramatic in my stories because of that experience growing up.
Yeah. The story is seeing. So even though you didn't get to see the movie, got to create it in your imagination, right?
Yes,
And that's the
exactly.
gift of the stories. That's beautiful. When in Trinidad, when the current would go, when we were small, like it's different now, but when I was small, the current would go and my mother would go into scary story mode, or she would go and grab these scary masks that she would have. I don't know where she got the mask from, but we knew immediately we were to like run, hide, and there was a game that would commence at that time. So it's social, and I think it does stick with us in a particular sort of way. So I think I would love to hear about the books and the work that you all have now, so the public can know where to find your work.
Ninja, do you want to go first?
Yes. Well, people can find me in social media as Negrita Come Coco. I don't know. I hope that you can see it on the Black Cook Festival social media because it's in Spanish. And also, I also write for a newspaper. I have a column in which I write stories basically about the Dominican folklore and the Dominican neighborhoods and things that we see in our neighborhoods. And you can also find me in my website, negritacomecoco.com. It's in Spanish, so that's why.
That's we're in the diaspora, so we have to learn these things even if we don't. So even if you want to, if we can type it in the chat so people can have it as well, that would be great. So this way we can find Indira. Indira, do you have a book out right now? Can you tell us the name of the book that you have out?
No, I don't have a book. I'm writing for one, but it's not out yet. So, but it's basically based on Dominican folklore and stories very related to our heritage.
Okay. Can you tell us the title of the book or give us a hint about one of the stories? If you can, it's okay. I'm fishing.
Well, one of the stories is about, it's related with food. It's basically a way to tell kids how the food shape us, and how the food is connected with different origins in the Dominican Republic, because we have the Spanish origin, but we also have the African origin and the indigenous origin. So it's a story that combines all of that through food.
Thank you, Indira. So hopefully people got that information and were able to write it inside of the chat so people can find Indira's work, and many blessings on your book that is coming out. Hope your children are extremely blessed from you. Omobola, do you have a book
So,
out right now? Where can we find you?
well, I have actually a lot of things out right now. You can you can go to my website. It's called Teni and Tayo. So TENIANDTAYO.com. So Teni and Tayo, those are the names of my daughters. Um, and in about a week, I'm launching a book on legendary African queens. It's a coloring book actually. So it's a coloring book for all ages. And in this book, you will learn you find images of all the different queens, but you will learn there's like a little blurb about each queen so you can learn about who they are, where they came from, why they're legendary queen. And so it's been a really fun book. The art is beautiful. So that comes back, it comes in about a week. It launches. I also have a whole host of other products for kids. I teach a storytelling class for kids online. And so if you go to my website, you can also learn about that. So kids can sign up, and I have kids from all over the world. And that's one of the reasons I say our stories are global, because sometimes I get a child from Korea and I'm like, oh wow, or from Ireland or from India, and I'm like, oh great, come on, let's join in. And so, and most of the kids are in my classes are not even African descent. So
Wow.
it's just like they just come in, they're like, I want to learn, I want to hear the stories, and even if they're not of African descent, they come and they stay and they enjoy the sessions. So I do the storytelling class, and then I have a bunch of like children's toys. And with all the toys I do, with all the books, even if it's like a small piece of Africa that I include in it, it's there. Like I have a building toy, and when you open the box, you get an African proverb. So I'm like,
That's
any
beautiful.
whatever it is, if it could be just like an African proverb when you open it, it could be a story about Africa. In one of my products, I have a toy where the kids can build a car that will drive, and but in there there's a superhero saying, oh, we're in Kenya and you need to solve the day by building this car, something like that. So everything has something about Africa woven into it, even if it's not necessarily an African item, if that makes sense. So yes, so you can find it all on tennyandtayo.com.
So, Omobola, you have been holding out on me. This is what I was asking about. How else do we tell the story? And you have a whole
Yes. You know what? You are so correct. That's true. Oh, I can't hear you. Your microphone went off. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
So I think that Jamie is having a challenge with her system. So I want to say thank you so very much to Jamie, Indhira, and Omobola for this lovely conversation. So much energy, so much goodness. Thank you so much. And we look forward, Jamie, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you again with us at the Black Consciousness Festival. Continue to walk in pride, power, and practice. Have a good evening. Take care. Bye.
so
Love you
much.
all.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation at the Black Consciousness Festival. All of our sessions are available on our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com, and on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. All of our conversations are intense, fun, enriching, and may also be challenging as we explore different facets of our history as people of African descent. Remember, you can find more on the festival on our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com. Have a good night, good evening, good afternoon, and a good morning, wherever you are joining us from. And remember to walk in pride, power, and practice.